The Galactic Council chamber was filled with the sound of laughter, and it was not the friendly kind. Daniel Wright stood at the human podium with his hands gripped tight on the metal edge. He had delivered Earth's message 3 minutes ago, and the reaction was exactly what his superiors had feared. 47 alien species sat in their designated areas, and almost all of them were making sounds that translated to mockery. The Zinthak ambassador was a tall creature made of something that looked like purple crystal, and it was clicking its communication device in a pattern that Daniel's translator interpreted as amusement. Sophie Morgan stood beside Daniel, and her face was red with barely controlled anger. She had served on the border colonies for 5 years, and she had seen what the Zinthak expansion meant for smaller species. Entire populations forced from their homes and planets, stripped of resources, and governments that protested were simply ignored. The Zinthak Dominion did whatever it wanted, and the Council did nothing to stop them. The Council Arbiter raised one of its 6 arms, and the chamber slowly quieted down. The Arbiter was an ancient being from a species that had been traveling space for thousands of years. It looked at Daniel with what might have been pity. "Ambassador Wright, your ultimatum has been heard and recorded. However, the Council must point out that Earth has been a member of our community for only 20 years. You have 4 colony worlds and a defensive fleet that our records show contains approximately 300 vessels. The Zinthak Dominion controls 200 star systems and maintains a military force of considerable power. Your demand that they withdraw from disputed territories within 72 hours is noted, but the Council does not believe this serves the cause of peace." Daniel had expected this response. He had been born in California and raised in a military family, and he knew when someone was underestimating him. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a data chip. This chip contains the complete documentation of Zinthak violations of territorial sovereignty. 17 independent worlds have been forcibly annexed in the past 2 years. The Council Charter clearly states that such actions are illegal. Earth is simply requesting that the law be enforced. The Zinthak ambassador made a sound like breaking glass. The law is enforced by those who have the power to enforce it. Your species lacks that power. We have claimed those systems because they were empty or inhabited by primitives who had no use for the resources. The galaxy operates on strength, not on the complaints of newcomers who think they understand our ways. Sophie stepped forward before Daniel could stop her. Her voice was loud and clear. "Those primitives you mentioned include the Helidon people, who had been living on their homeworld for 8,000 years before you showed up and told them to leave. They include the Tyrellian colonies that were mining asteroids peacefully until your ships destroyed their stations. You call it expansion, but everyone else calls it theft and murder." The chamber went silent. Speaking out of turn was a violation of protocol, but Sophie did not seem to care. Daniel put a hand on her shoulder and gently pulled her back. He looked directly at the Zinthak ambassador. "Earth's position is simple and clear. Withdraw from all illegally occupied systems within 72 hours or face military consequences. This is not a negotiation, and it is not a request. It is a statement of what will happen." The laughter started again, but this time it was louder. The Vryn delegation was making a high-pitched chittering sound. The Rathani, who usually stayed neutral, were making gestures that their species used to express disbelief. Even some of the smaller species who had suffered under Zinthak expansion seemed to think the human ultimatum was foolish. The Zinthak ambassador stood to its full height, which was nearly 3 meters. "Let me make this clear for the humans who seem confused about their place in the galaxy. Our 9th Fleet alone contains 800 warships. Each vessel is equipped with weapons capable of reducing a planet to molten rock. Our shields can withstand any kinetic or energy weapon in the known galaxy. Your entire fleet could not defeat a single battle group from our 9th Fleet, so please explain to this council what you think you will accomplish with your military consequences." Daniel closed his briefcase with a snap that echoed in the silent chamber. "Then I suppose we will demonstrate what we can accomplish. The 72-hour deadline begins now." He turned and walked toward the exit with Sophie following behind him. The laughter and talking started again before they even left the room. In the corridor outside, Sophie finally spoke. "Sir, do you think they will take us seriously?" Daniel kept walking. "No, Lieutenant, I don't think they will take us seriously. That is exactly what Admiral Hayes is counting on. 12,000 light years, away in a mountain complex buried deep under the Colorado Mountains, Admiral Jacob Hayes was studying a holographic display of the Zinthak 9th Fleet, the display showed 800 ships arranged in a standard defensive formation around 3 star systems. They were confident and relaxed and completely unprepared for what was coming. Captain Lisa Brennan entered the command center and saluted. "Admiral, all ships are in position. We have 42 vessels of the new class ready to deploy on your order. The Defiance, Valiant, and Retribution are leading the 3 strike groups." Jacob nodded without taking his eyes off the display. He was 53 years old and he had spent 35 of those years in the military. He had studied every major battle in human history, and quite a few alien conflicts as well. He knew that surprise was worth more than numbers, and that confidence was a weakness waiting to be exploited. "How long until the deadline expires?" 68 hours and 14 minutes, sir." "Good. That gives them time to think about withdrawing peacefully." Jacob finally looked at Lisa. "Do you think they will withdraw?" Lisa smiled, but there was no humor in it. "No, sir. I think they will laugh at us until the moment our weapons fire. Then we better make sure that first shot counts." Jacob pulled up another display showing the specifications of their new weapons systems. "The galaxy thinks we are still using the same ships they saw 20 years ago when we first made contact. They think our technology is primitive and our tactics are simple. They have no idea what we have been building." Lisa moved closer to study the display. "The graviton torpedoes are fully tested and the spatial fold drives are operating at 98% efficiency. We have been running combat simulations for 6 months and the results are consistent. We can take the 9th Fleet." Jacob turned to face her directly. "Taking them is not the goal, Captain. The goal is to send a message that every species in the galaxy will understand. Earth gave a warning and Earth keeps its promises. When we are done with the 9th Fleet, no one will ever laugh at a human. Ultimatum again. Do you think this will start a war, sir?" Jacob was quiet for a moment, maybe, but doing nothing would guarantee that humanity stays on the bottom of the galactic hierarchy forever. We tried diplomacy and they laughed. We tried reasoning and they ignored us. Now we show them what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. He pressed a button on his command console. "All ships maintain readiness condition 1. We deploy in 68 hours. Back on the council station, Daniel and Sophie sat in their quarters watching the galactic news feeds. Every major network was covering the human ultimatum, and every commentator was treating it as a joke. One Vrin analyst was explaining in great detail why human technology was at least 50 years behind the major powers. A Rathani military expert was listing all the ways the Zinthak 9th Fleet could destroy Earth's forces. Sophie turned off the display in disgust. They have no idea what is coming. Daniel was reading reports on his datapad. Good. Let them keep thinking we are primitive. Admiral Hayes needs them overconfident and careless. Sophie poured herself a drink from the quarter's small kitchen area. Sir, can I ask you something? When did we develop all this new technology? I have been in the military for 8 years, and I never heard anything about spatial fold drives or graviton weapons until 3 months ago. Daniel looked up from his pad. That is because it was the most classified project in human history. After we joined the Galactic Council 20 years ago, our scientists studied every piece of technology they could get their hands on. They visited alien universities and attended scientific conferences and bought technical manuals from every species willing to sell them. Then they came home and spent 2 decades figuring out how to do everything better. But why keep it secret? Because if the galaxy knew what we were capable of, they would have found ways to counter it, or they would have attacked us before we were ready. Secrecy was our greatest weapon. The Zinthak think they are facing the same primitive humans who showed up in outdated ships 20 years ago. In 68 hours, they are going to learn the truth. Sophie sat down heavily. A lot of people are going to die. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, they are. That is why we gave them a warning. That is why we set a deadline. We gave them every chance to avoid this. If they choose to fight, then their deaths are their own responsibility. The 72-hour countdown continued. On Earth, families of the military personnel waited anxiously. In the Zinthak systems, the 9th Fleet maintained its patrols without any sense of urgency. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was called within 2 hours of the battle's end. The chamber that had been filled with laughter 3 days ago was now silent and tense. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated areas watching the holographic display that showed the aftermath of what everyone was now calling the Battle of the 9th Fleet. The display showed the wreckage of 200 Zinthak warships drifting in space. It showed 600 more vessels sitting powerless under human guard. And it showed 42 human ships moving with calm efficiency as they organized the prisoners and secured the captured territory. The numbers did not make sense. The outcome should have been impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. Ambassador Daniel Wright stood at the human podium with Sophie Morgan beside him. He had been preparing for this moment since the battle began, but that did not make it any easier. The entire galaxy was watching, and what he said now would shape Earth's future for generations. The Council Arbiter spoke first. Ambassador Wright, humanity has demonstrated military capabilities far beyond what was disclosed when you joined the Council 20 years ago. This represents a serious breach of our disclosure protocols. You were required to provide accurate information about your military strength. Daniel had expected this accusation. With respect, Arbiter, the protocols require disclosure of military capabilities used in Council operations. Earth has never deployed these vessels under Council authority. They were built purely for the defense of human territory and our allies. We violated no law. The new Zinthak ambassador stood up. He was smaller than the previous one and looked far less confident. Ambassador Wright, your fleet just destroyed 800 ships. You claim this was defensive action, but it looks like an act of war. Daniel turned to face the Zinthak representative directly. Your 9th Fleet was in sovereign territory that it had seized illegally. Earth gave you 72 hours to withdraw peacefully. You chose to stay. You chose to fight. The consequences of that choice are your responsibility, not ours. Avrin ambassador clicked forward, making agitated sounds. What prevents you from using this fleet against any of us? You have just proven you could challenge even the Council's peacekeeping forces. How do we know you will not become the very threat you claim to oppose? Sophie spoke before Daniel could respond. Her voice was clear and firm. What prevents us is the same thing that has always prevented us, which is honor. Humanity did not seek this conflict. We spent 20 years trying to change the system through diplomacy. We watched as stronger species bullied weaker ones. We saw the Council fail to enforce its own laws. We hoped things would change peacefully. But when the Zinthak invaded sovereign territory and the Council did nothing, we had to make a choice. We could accept that might makes right, or we could prove that there are consequences for aggression. We chose to stand up for what was right, and we will continue to do so. The chamber erupted in argument. Some species were calling for sanctions against Earth. Others were demanding technical specifications of human weapons. A few of the smaller species were quietly expressing support for what humanity had done. The chaos continued until the Arbiter raised all 6 arms for silence. Admiral Hayes appeared on the main display, transmitting from the UES Defiance. The chamber went silent as the human military commander looked out at the assembled representatives. Members of the Council, I understand your concern and your fear. You have just witnessed the destruction of one of the galaxy's major fleets by a force you did not know existed. That is frightening. But let me be clear about humanity's intentions. We do not seek to dominate the galaxy. We do not wish to impose our will on others. We do not want to rule over you. What we want is simple. We want a galaxy where the strong cannot prey on the weak with impunity. We want a council that actually enforces its laws. We want smaller species to have the same rights and protections as larger ones. For 20 years, we have watched the council allow territorial expansion through force. We have seen disputes settled by whoever had the biggest fleet. We have heard beautiful speeches about justice and equality, while watching those principles ignored in practice. We tried to change this through words. Today we proved we can change it through action if necessary. Humanity offers the Council a choice: reform the system to protect all species equally, or watch as we defend the defenseless ourselves. We would prefer to work within the system, but we will not allow the system to perpetuate injustice simply because that is how things have always been done. The transmission ended and the chamber remained silent for a long moment. Daniel noticed something important happening. Several of the smaller species representatives were looking at the humans with expressions that translated to hope. The Tyrellian ambassador stood up slowly. Ambassador Wright, the Tyrellian Republic has suffered from Zinthak expansion for 5 years. We have protested to the Council 18 times. We have provided evidence of illegal annexation. We have begged for protection. Every time we were told that the matter would be investigated. Nothing ever changed. Today you did in 20 minutes what the Council failed to do in 5 years. You protected the innocent. A Helidon representative rose next. The Helidon Confederacy stands with Earth. We have lost 3 colony worlds to Zinthak expansion. We were told we should negotiate. We were told we should compromise. We were told we should accept the reality of power. Today we learned that reality can be changed. One by one, representatives from smaller species stood to express support. Within an hour, Daniel counted 23 species that had publicly backed Earth's actions. It was not a majority, but it was enough to prevent any immediate sanctions or retaliation. The Rothani observer, who usually remained neutral, requested permission to speak. The arbiter granted it. I have been an observer to this council for 40 years. In that time I have seen the strong grow stronger and the weak grow weaker. I have seen laws applied selectively based on military power. I have watched as the council became less a body of justice and more a club, where the powerful divide the galaxy among themselves. What humanity did today was not an act of war. It was an act of enforcement. They enforced the territorial sovereignty that the council charter guarantees. They enforced the protection that the council promised but failed to deliver. If we punish them for doing what we should have done ourselves, then we admit that the council exists only to serve the strong. The arbiter considered this for a long moment. Ambassador Wright, what does Earth want from this council? Daniel took a breath. He had practiced this speech 100 times. We want 3 things. First, we want territorial reforms that protect smaller species from forced annexation. Second, we want an enforcement mechanism that actually responds to violations instead of just investigating them. Third, we want the council restructured so that size and military power do not automatically grant greater influence. That is asking us to completely change how the council operates. Yes, it is. Because the current system is broken. It allows injustice and calls it stability. It protects the powerful and abandons the weak. Humanity will not participate in such a system. We would rather stand alone than compromise our principles. The debate continued for hours. The larger species argued that the current system worked fine. The smaller species argued that it had never worked for them. The council was divided in a way it had not been in centuries. Finally, the arbiter called for a recess to allow governments to consult with their leaders. Daniel and Sophie returned to their quarters exhausted. Sophie poured them both drinks. Do you think they will accept our demands? Daniel sat heavily in a chair. Some will and some will not. But we have something now that we did not have before, which is leverage. 23 species publicly supported us. That is almost half the council. The larger powers cannot simply vote down reforms anymore. What if they try to form a coalition against us? Then we activate the contingency plan. We offer defensive pacts to every species that wants protection. We create an alliance outside the council structure. We show them that Earth can survive and thrive whether the council reforms or not. Sophie looked worried. That could split the galaxy in half. Daniel nodded. Yes, it could. But sometimes, you have to be willing to break something before you can fix it. The council has been coasting on the momentum of its founding principles for too long. Those principles meant something once, but now they are just words that people say while doing the opposite. On the UES Defiance, Admiral Hayes was having a similar conversation with Captain Lisa Brennan. They stood in the observation deck watching the stars. Sir, do you think we did the right thing? Jacob was quiet for a moment. I think we did what was necessary. Whether it was right will be determined by what happens next. If we use this victory to create a more just system, then yes, it was right. If we use it to become the new bullies, then no, it was not. Lisa considered this. The crew is proud of what we accomplished. They feel like we stood up for something important. That is good. But make sure they understand that winning a battle is easy compared to winning the peace. Any fool can destroy. It takes wisdom to build. Back on the council station, a small gathering was taking place in a neutral bar. Commander Vraxith stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominance and felt satisfaction flowing through his crystalline body. The human deadline had passed 6 hours ago, and no Earth vessels had appeared anywhere near the disputed systems. It was exactly as he had predicted. The mammals had made their dramatic threat, and then retreated when they realized the impossibility of following through. His tactical officer was reviewing patrol reports and everything showed normal operations. Commander, shall I send a message to the council, confirming that the human ultimatum was meaningless? Vraxith made a clicking sound of approval. Yes, and also begin the colonization procedures for System 447. The humans have shown they cannot stop us, so we will proceed with our expansion as planned. The sensor operator suddenly made a confused sound. Commander, I am detecting unusual readings at coordinates 77 Mark III. Vraxith moved to the sensor station without concern. Define unusual. The operator adjusted the controls. Sir, it appears that space itself is folding. I have never seen readings like this. Vraxith looked at the sensor display and felt something he had not experienced in many years, which was confusion. The readings showed 42 distinct spatial distortions appearing from nowhere. There were no hyperspace signatures and no jump-wake signatures and no energy trails that would indicate normal, faster-than-light travel. Ships were simply appearing in space as if they had always been there. What manner of technology is this? The distortions resolved into solid forms, and Vraxith's confusion turned into something closer to concern. 42 ships hung in space, arranged in an attack formation that his tactical computer immediately flagged as aggressive. But these were not the blocky, primitive vessels that Zinthak intelligence had documented from human space. These ships were sleek and dark and covered in what looked like some kind of energy field that made them difficult to scan. Commander, the human vessels are not matching any profiles in our database. They appear to be using some kind of stealth technology that interferes with our sensors. The power readings I am getting are far beyond what our intelligence reports suggested was possible for human engineering. Vraxith forced himself to remain calm. Open a communication channel to the lead human vessel. If they had come to negotiate, then he would listen before destroying them for their impudence. A moment later, a human face appeared on the main view screen. The human was older, with gray hair and cold eyes that seemed to look directly into Vraxith's core. I am Admiral Jacob Hayes of the United Earth Space Forces. You are Commander Vraxith of the Zinthak 9th Fleet. Your fleet is currently in violation of the territorial sovereignty of 3 independent systems. You were given 72 hours to withdraw peacefully. That deadline has now passed. You have one final opportunity to leave this space without further conflict. Vraxith made a sound that his translator would convert to laughter. Admiral Hayes, you are either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Your 42 vessels face 800 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. Your technology is primitive and your tactics are untested against a real military power. I suggest you withdraw before I am forced to destroy your entire fleet. The human admiral did not show any sign of fear or doubt. Commander, let me tell you something about human history. My species spent 10,000 years fighting wars on our homeworld. We fought with sticks and stones, and then with bronze and iron, and then with gunpowder and nuclear weapons. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times, but we learned something valuable from all that bloodshed. And what did you learn? Admiral, we learned that the most dangerous opponent is not the one with the biggest weapon. It is the one who refuses to quit. The one who studies every defeat and turns it into a lesson. The one who will do whatever it takes to protect what matters. Your species built an empire on the assumption that size and strength are all that matter. You are about to learn why that assumption is wrong. Vraxith was about to respond when his tactical officer interrupted with alarm in his voice. Commander, the human vessels are charging weapons, but the power levels are impossible. Our sensors indicate they are generating energy outputs that should require a ship 3 times that size. Some kind of spatial manipulation technology is creating artificial gravity wells around their weapons systems. Admiral Hayes spoke again, and this time there was no diplomatic tone in his voice. Commander Vraxith, you laughed at Earth's ultimatum. You dismissed our warnings. You assumed we were weak because we chose peace. That was your mistake. The communication ended. Vraxith had one moment to give orders before the human fleet opened fire. All ships raise shields and return fire. Target their command vessels and show these primitives what Zinthak weapons can do. But even as he gave the orders, some part of him knew that something was terribly wrong. The first human salvo hit the Eternal Dominance with force that should not have been possible. The shields that had protected Zinthak ships for centuries flickered and died in less than 10 seconds. Vraxith watched in horror as his tactical display showed massive damage reports flowing in from across the ship. What hit us? He demanded. The weapons officer was trying to make sense of the data. Commander, they are using railguns that fire projectiles at nearly 30% light speed. Our shields were not designed to stop kinetic weapons moving that fast. They are also using some kind of plasma lance that burns through our hull material like it was paper. And there is a third weapon type that I cannot identify, but it appears to twist space around the target. All around the Eternal Dominance, other Zinthak ships were dying. The humans had spread their 42 vessels into 3 groups, and each group was targeting a specific section of the 9th Fleet. They moved with precision, that spoke of extensive planning and their weapons fired with accuracy that suggested advanced targeting systems, far beyond what Zinthak intelligence had reported. Human destroyer that was 1/5 the size of a Zinthak cruiser suddenly vanished from the tactical display. For a moment Vraxith thought they had destroyed it, but then it reappeared directly behind the cruiser. The human ship fired at point-blank range and the cruiser exploded in a ball of plasma. "They can teleport," he said in disbelief. "Not teleport, sir. They are using some kind of spatial fold technology that allows them to move through compressed space. They can appear anywhere within their operational range in seconds." Vraxith watched as his fleet tried to respond, but they were completely outmatched. Zinthak ships were designed to fight opponents who used similar technology and similar tactics. They had heavy armor and powerful shields and weapons that could destroy planets, but the humans were not fighting like any opponent the Zinthak had ever faced. They appeared and disappeared. They struck from unexpected angles. They used weapons that ignored conventional defenses. "Commander, we are receiving damage reports from across the fleet. We have lost 87 ships in the first 5 minutes. Another 100 are reporting critical damage. The fleet is requesting permission to retreat." Vraxith made a decision that went against every instinct he had. "All ships attempt to jump to hyperspace. We must regroup and report this to High Command." But as soon as he gave the order, his science officer made a sound of despair. "Commander, the human ships are generating artificial gravity wells. They are preventing us from entering hyperspace. We are trapped." The battle continued for another 15 minutes, and it was not a battle but a massacre. The human ships moved through the Zinthak formation like predators among prey. Every shot they fired found its target. Every maneuver they made was perfectly executed. The Ninth Fleet had expected to fight primitives, but instead they faced warriors who had spent 20 years preparing for this exact moment. Vraxith's ship was dying around him. Half the bridge crew was dead, and the other half was trying desperately to keep basic systems online. He could see on his tactical display that hundreds of other ships were in similar condition. The proud Ninth Fleet was being destroyed by a force 1/20th its size. A communication came through from one of the surviving cruisers. "Commander Vraxith, we request permission to surrender. We cannot win this fight." Vraxith wanted to refuse. He wanted to order the fleet to fight to the last ship. But that would be murder, and he knew it. "Send surrender signals to all ships. Power down weapons and shields. Perhaps the humans will show mercy." The surrender signal went out, and slowly the surviving Zinthak ships began powering down. The human fleet stopped firing immediately. Vraxith felt a strange respect for that. The humans could have continued the slaughter, but they had accepted the surrender. Admiral Hayes appeared on the view screen again. "Commander Vraxith, your surrender is accepted. All Zinthak vessels will be disarmed and escorted back to your territory. Any ship that attempts to power weapons or flee will be destroyed. You came here to enforce an illegal expansion, and you paid the price. Let this be a lesson to your people and to every species in the galaxy. Earth keeps its promises." The transmission ended and Vraxith slumped in his command chair. Around him, the bridge crew worked silently to comply with the human demands. Outside the ship, human vessels were moving among the wreckage and organizing the prisoners. The Eternal Dominance was a broken shell, and the Ninth Fleet had ceased to exist as a fighting force. 3 months after the Battle of the Ninth Fleet, Daniel Wright sat in a conference room with representatives from 32 species. They called themselves the Coalition for Mutual Defense, and they wanted Earth's protection. Daniel had spent weeks negotiating the terms of what would become the most significant alliance in recent galactic history. The Tyrellian ambassador spoke first. "Ambassador Wright, our governments have reviewed your proposed treaty. We find the terms acceptable. The question now is whether you can convince your government to take on the responsibility of defending so many species." Daniel looked around the table at the assembled representatives. They were mostly from smaller species that had suffered from the expansionist policies of larger powers. Some had lost colony worlds. Others had been forced to accept unfair trade agreements. All of them saw Earth as their best hope for a future where they could exist without fear. Let me be clear about what this alliance means. Earth will provide military protection against aggression, but we will not be your private army. We will not fight your wars of conquest. We will not help you settle disputes with each other through force. What we will do is guarantee your sovereignty and come to your defense if you are attacked. In return, we expect honest trade, open diplomacy, and a commitment to peaceful resolution of conflicts. If any member of this alliance engages in the same aggressive behavior we just punished the Zinthak for, then we will withdraw our protection. This alliance is built on principles, not convenience. The Heladan representative nodded. We understand and we accept these terms. When can we formalize the agreement? Daniel smiled slightly. As soon as I get approval from Earth. President Carter is addressing Congress tomorrow on this exact issue. If they approve, and I believe they will, then we can sign the treaty within a week. Back on Earth, President. Helen Carter stood before a joint session of Congress, preparing to make the case for the Mutual Defense Alliance. The chamber was packed and every major news network was broadcasting live. This was the most important foreign policy decision since Earth had joined the Galactic Council. Members of Congress, 3 months ago, we gave the Zinthak Dominion an ultimatum. We told them to withdraw from illegally occupied territory or face military action. They laughed at us. They dismissed us as primitives who did not understand how the galaxy really works. Our fleet proved them wrong. Today we face another choice. 32 species have asked us to guarantee their security. They want to join an alliance where Earth promises to defend them against aggression. Some of you will say, this is too much responsibility. Some will say we should focus on our own interests and let the galaxy sort itself out. I understand those concerns, but I ask you to consider what happens if we say no. These 32 species will remain vulnerable. The Zinthak or others like them will continue to expand. The Council will continue to ignore violations of its own laws. And humanity will have proven that our victory over the Ninth Fleet was just about protecting ourselves, not about creating a better system. We have an opportunity to reshape galactic politics. We can create an alliance based on mutual respect and collective security. We can show that strength should be used to protect the weak, not to exploit them. We can build something that our children and grandchildren will be proud of. The alternative is to retreat into isolation and watch as the galaxy returns to business as usual. I do not believe that is who we are as a species. I do not believe we fought and won against impossible odds just to maintain the status quo. I believe we can be better, and I believe the galaxy can be better with our help. I am asking Congress to approve the Mutual Defense Alliance. I am asking you to authorize Earth's military to defend 32 species that have placed their trust in us. I am asking you to bet on the idea that doing the right thing will ultimately serve our interests, better than pure self-interest ever could. The speech was met with both applause and opposition, but ultimately, the vote was not close. Congress approved the alliance with a significant majority. Within a week, the treaty was signed in a ceremony that was broadcast across the galaxy. Admiral Jacob Hayes watched the ceremony from his office in Colorado. Captain Lisa Brennan sat across from him. Sir, we are now responsible for the defense of 32 species spread across hundreds of systems. Our fleet is powerful, but we cannot be everywhere at once. Jacob had been thinking about this problem for months. That is why we are going to do something unprecedented. We are going to share some of our technology with our allies. Not everything and not the most advanced systems, but enough that they can defend themselves until we arrive. Lisa looked surprised. Sir, that goes against everything we have done to keep our technology secret. Jacob nodded. Yes, it does. But keeping everything secret was a temporary strategy to give us an advantage. Now we need to shift to a long-term strategy. We need allies who can contribute to collective defense, not just depend on us for everything. What are you proposing? Jacob pulled up a holographic display showing various human technologies. We share our shield improvements and our sensor upgrades. We help them modernize their existing fleets. We establish joint training programs. We create a network where information and resources flow freely among alliance members. In 5 years, our allies will have fleets that are competitive with the major powers. They will not be as advanced as ours, but they will be strong enough to defend themselves and support us when needed. That creates a true alliance instead of a protection racket. Lisa studied the proposal. The Council will see this as an arms race. The major powers will not like us arming smaller species. Jacob smiled. No, they will not like it at all. But what are they going to do about it? Attack us? We just destroyed their most powerful fleet. Challenge the alliance. We now represent nearly 40% of Council membership. The age where a few large species controlled everything is ending whether they like it or not. On the Council station, Sophie Morgan was meeting with Kelvin, the Rothani merchant. They had developed a friendship over the past months, and Sophie valued his perspective on galactic politics. Kelvin sipped a drink that glowed faintly blue. Lieutenant, your people have accomplished something remarkable. You have created an alliance that threatens the entire power structure of the galaxy. Sophie frowned. We are not trying to threaten anyone. We just want to protect our allies. Kelvin made a sound that might have been laughter. You may not see it as a threat, but the major powers certainly do. For centuries, they have maintained control through a simple formula. They were strong, and everyone else was weak. They set the rules, and everyone else followed them. Now you have upset that formula. Is that a bad thing? Kelvin tilted his head in a gesture that meant complicated. It is dangerous. The major powers will not give up their privileged position without a fight. Some will try to counter your alliance by forming their own. Others will try to divide your coalition by offering better terms to individual members. A few might even consider military action. Sophie felt a chill. You think someone might attack us? Kelvin was serious. I think someone will test you. They will create a situation where you have to choose between honoring your commitments and avoiding a larger conflict. They will want to see if your alliance is real or just words on paper. What should we do? Kelvin finished his drink. Be ready and be consistent. The moment you fail to honor your commitments is the moment the alliance falls apart. But if you prove that you will actually fight to protect even the smallest member, then the alliance becomes unbreakable. 6 months after the Battle of the Ninth Fleet, the first test came. A Vryn battle group entered Tyrellian space, claiming they were conducting exercises in neutral territory. The Tyrellian government protested that the space was not neutral but part of their sovereign system. The Vryn refused to leave. Daniel received the emergency communication in the middle of the night. The Tyrellian ambassador was clearly frightened. Ambassador Wright, the Vryn have 15 warships in our primary system. They claim they are just exercising their right to free navigation, but they are positioned between our homeworld and our defensive stations. This is an obvious intimidation tactic. Have they fired on anything? No, but they are preventing our ships from moving freely. They are boarding our merchant vessels for inspections. They are violating our sovereignty in every way except actually shooting. Daniel contacted Admiral Hayes immediately. The Admiral listened to the situation and made his decision within seconds. Deploy the nearest battle group to Tyrellian space. Make it clear to the Vryn that they need to leave immediately. Sir, this could start a shooting war. Hayes' expression was grim. Then the Vryn better decide whether they want to start that war. We told every species in the galaxy that we would defend our allies. If we back down now, the alliance is worthless. The UES Valiant and 6 supporting vessels arrived in Tyrellian space 4 hours later. Captain Pete Morris contacted the Vryn battle group commander. This is Captain Morris of the United Earth Space Forces. You are in violation of Tyrellian sovereignty. You have 1 hour to withdraw or we will escort you out. The Vryn commander responded with obvious irritation. Captain Morris, we are conducting routine exercises in space that is disputed. We do not recognize Tyrellian claims to this system. Pete kept his voice calm. 1 year after the destruction of the Zinthak Ninth Fleet, the Galactic Council convened in a chamber that had been physically redesigned. The seating arrangements no longer placed the largest species in the most prominent positions. Instead, every member had equal placement based on the length of their membership and their population size. It was a small change, but it symbolized the larger transformation that had occurred. Daniel Wright stood at the human podium watching as the council arbiter called the session to order. Beside him, Sophie Morgan held a datapad containing the final version of the Reformed Council Charter. They had fought for this document for 12 months. They had negotiated with dozens of species. They had made compromises and stood firm on principles. Now it was finally ready for a vote. The arbiter spoke in a formal tone. Members of the council, we are here to vote on the Reformed Council Charter as proposed by the Coalition for Mutual Defense and co-signed by 47 member species. This charter represents the most significant change to council operations since our founding. I will now open debate. The Zinthak ambassador rose first. He was younger than his predecessors and seemed more willing to accept the new reality. The Zinthak Dominion supports this charter. We have learned through painful experience that the old system benefited no one in the long term. We expanded our territory through force and believed we were building an empire. Instead, we were building resentment that eventually led to our humiliation. This new charter offers a better path forward. Daniel had not expected the Zinthak to support the reforms. It spoke to how much had changed in the past year. Other species followed with their statements. Some were enthusiastic supporters. Others expressed reservations but acknowledged the need for change. A few of the older major powers still opposed the reforms, but their objections sounded hollow, even to themselves. When the vote was called, 41 species voted in favor. Only 6 voted against. The Reformed Council Charter was now law. The chamber erupted in applause from the smaller species representatives, while the larger powers sat in quiet resignation. The charter established several key principles. First, it created an enforcement mechanism with real authority to respond to violations of sovereignty. Second, it restructured voting procedures to prevent a few large species from dominating decisions. Third, it required transparency in military buildups and established limits on territorial expansion. Fourth, it created a mutual defense framework that made aggression against any member an attack on all. After the vote, Daniel addressed the council. This charter is not perfect. It will require amendments and adjustments as we learn how to implement it, but it represents a fundamental shift in how we view the galaxy. We are no longer a collection of competing powers trying to grab as much territory as possible. We are a community of species trying to coexist peacefully. Earth did not seek to lead this reform movement. We would have preferred to join a system that already worked. But we could not stand by and watch injustice continue. The destruction of the Ninth Fleet was tragic but necessary. It demonstrated that aggression has consequences. Today's vote demonstrates that cooperation has rewards. Humanity pledges to uphold this charter and to work with all species to make it successful. We do not claim to have all the answers. We do not think we are better than anyone else. We simply believe that every species deserves the right to exist without fear. That belief guided us a year ago and it guides us now. The speech was met with sustained applause. Sophie leaned close to Daniel. We did it, sir. We actually changed the system. Daniel nodded, but his expression remained serious. We started the change, Sophie. Maintaining it will be the real challenge. On Earth, President Helen Carter hosted a celebration at the White House. Admiral Jacob Hayes and Captain Lisa Brennan had been invited along with key members of Congress and the military leadership. Helen raised a glass for a toast. To the men and women who believed that humanity could make a difference in the galaxy. To those who risked everything to enforce our principles, and to the future we have helped create. Jacob accepted the praise but remained thoughtful. Later he found himself on a balcony overlooking the city with Helen. She studied his face. You are not celebrating, Admiral. Why not? Jacob sighed. Because I am worried about what comes next, Madam President. We have reshaped galactic politics through a combination of military strength and diplomatic skill. But power has a way of corrupting even the best intentions. Helen considered this. You think we might become what we opposed? Jacob nodded. I think it is a risk we must guard against constantly. Right now we are the defenders of the weak. We use our strength to protect others. But what happens in 20 years when a new generation of leaders takes over? What happens when they start to believe that our way is the only way? What happens when we start using our fleet to enforce our preferences instead of just protecting sovereignty? Helen was quiet for a moment. What do you recommend? Jacob turned to face her. We need to establish limits on our own power. We need to create mechanisms that prevent us from abusing the trust our allies have placed in us. We need to make sure that Earth remains accountable to the principles we claim to uphold. That will not be popular with some people. Power rarely wants to limit itself. Jacob smiled grimly. No, it will not be popular, but it is necessary. The galaxy is watching us. If we prove that we can wield power responsibly, then others will follow our example. If we prove that we are just another empire with better marketing, then we will lose everything we have built. Across the galaxy, the impacts of the Reformed Council were already being felt. In the Tyrellian Republic, citizens were celebrating their newfound security. The Vryn battle group incident had convinced them that Earth's protection was real. They were now investing in education and infrastructure, instead of desperately trying to build a military they could not afford. In the Helidon Confederacy, trade was flourishing. Ships that once feared piracy now traveled freely under the protection of joint patrols. The economy was growing and the government was planning to reclaim colony worlds. They had lost to Zinthak expansion. On the neutral station, Meridian Point Kelvin the Rathani merchant met with Sophie one last time before she returned to Earth. They sat in the same bar where they had first discussed the implications of the Ninth Fleet battle. You are leaving, Lieutenant. Sophie nodded. My tour here is ending. I am being reassigned to a training position on Earth. Someone else will take over the diplomatic liaison role. Kelvin made a gesture of respect. You have done good work here. You helped build something important. Sophie smiled. I did my job. The real credit belongs to Ambassador Wright and Admiral Hayes. They were the ones who took the risks. Kelvin disagreed. They made the big decisions, but you were here every day building relationships and solving problems. That work matters just as much. What do you think happens now, Kelvin? Do you think the reforms will last? The Rothani merchant was thoughtful. I think they will last as long as humanity remains committed to them. The galaxy has learned that Earth keeps its promises, both the threats and the offers of protection. As long as that remains true, the system will work. But you must remember that you have made enemies. The species that benefited from the old system have not forgotten their losses. They will look for opportunities to undermine the reforms. They will test the Alliance at every opportunity. Your people must remain vigilant. Sophie promised to carry that warning back to Earth. As she left the station, she looked out at the stars and thought about how much had changed in a single year. Humanity had arrived at the Galactic Council as uncertain newcomers. They had been dismissed and mocked. They had watched injustice and decided to act. They had won a battle that should have been impossible, and they had used that victory to reshape the galaxy. Admiral Hayes returned to his office in the Colorado Mountains. Captain Lisa Brennan was waiting with reports on the fleet's current status. Sir, we have 42 ships of the advanced class operational. Another 30 are in various stages of construction. Our allies have begun upgrading their fleets with the technology we shared. The balance of power has shifted significantly. Jacob studied the reports. And our potential adversaries. Lisa pulled up another display. The Vryn have increased their military budget, but they are not building anything that threatens us. The Zinthak are still rebuilding from their losses. The other major powers are mostly focused on internal matters. No one seems eager to challenge us directly. That is what worries me, Captain. Jacob leaned back in his chair. We are too strong. We have too much influence. Other species are either our allies or too afraid to oppose us. That is not healthy for a democratic system. Lisa frowned. Sir, are you saying we should have not done what we did? Jacob shook his head. No, I am saying we need to be very careful about what we do next. We need to make sure we do not let our power isolate us or corrupt us. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the mountain range. My father used to tell me that the hardest battles are not won on the battlefield, but in the hearts of the victors. Winning a war is about strength and strategy. Winning the peace is about wisdom and restraint. We won the war, Captain. Now we have to prove we can win the peace. 5 years after the Battle of the Ninth Fleet, the Galactic Council held.